imagine someone sits you down at a table, right? And they slide a crisp $10 bill across to you.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
And they say, I'm offering you one single dollar out of this 10, and I'm going to keep the other 9.
Right, a classic split.
Yeah, but here is the catch. You can either say yes, and you both walk away with your cut, or you say no, and the $10 literally gets set on fire. Like, nobody gets a dime.
So it's a take it or leave it scenario.
Exactly. Now, if you consult the absolute foundational bedrock of modern Western economics, I mean, the literal mathematical models that dictate our global markets and our interest rates today, you are supposed to be a perfectly rational, maximizing individual.
Right, the homo economicus.
Yeah. So according to the math, you should enthusiastically take that $1 because, $1 is objectively mathematically better than $0. Free money is free money.
Right. I mean, why would you turn down free money?
Exactly. But if you run that exact experiment across, I think it was 15 different human cultures.
Yeah, 15 drastically different societies, from urban stockbrokers in New York all the way to, like, the Machigenga hunter-gatherers down in the Peruvian Amazon.
Right. And what happens when you do that? The rational choice almost never happens.
It completely falls apart. Humans will look at that $1, they'll look the person offering it right in the eye, and they will choose to just set the money on fire.
They will literally walk away with nothing, just to punish the other person for offering a terrible deal.
Exactly. They are punishing them for violating this deeply ingrained cultural sense of fairness.
Which is wild, because that anomaly, that absolute failure of standard economics to predict what actual human beings will do, is the starting point for our deep dive today.
It's such a perfect hook.
It really is. So for everyone listening, you are the ultimate learner here, and we are diving into a really brilliant academic text called Economies and Cultures by Richard R. Wilk and Lisa Cliggott.
It is a phenomenal book.
It really is, because it forces us to basically tear down this artificial wall that we've built, the wall between economics, which is like the strict math of scarcity and money, and anthropology.
Right, anthropology being the study of human culture, which is always messy and unpredictable.
Okay, let's unpack this, because this book forces us to confront this huge question that philosophers and economists have literally been battling over for a century.
And it boils down to one thing. Is human nature fundamentally selfish? Is it fundamentally social? Or is it fundamentally moral?
Right. And how you answer that question changes everything.
It changes how you view the economy entirely. If you build a society, assuming humans are just inherently selfish, you're going to engineer a vastly different world than if you assume we're driven by social obligations or, some kind of moral cosmology.
Yeah, you write completely different laws. You build different institutions.
Exactly. And the mission of our deep dive today is to basically guide you through these massive historical academic brawls to see how we got here.
We're going to look at some crazy examples, too, like Maya roof thatchers and these Trobriand island traders.
And we have to start by looking at the middle of the 20th century. That's when this field of economic anthropology was essentially born.
Right, because before the 1950s, anthropology was mostly just descriptive. People would go to the Pacific Islands, write down what they saw, and come home.
Right, it was just cataloging.
But then they started trying to apply formal Western economic theory to these non-Western societies, and that's when the whole discipline just fractured.
It split into two totally warring camps. We call this the formalist-substantivist debate.
Which sounds super academic, but it was basically a barroom brawl.
Oh, it was vicious. It's one of the most foundational clashes in the social sciences.
So let's start with the substantivist. Who was their main guy?
Their theoretical godfather was an economic historian named Karl Polanyi. In 1944, he published this monumental book called The Great Transformation.
Which completely reframed how we even think about capitalism, right?
Exactly. Polanyi's core thesis was that modern market capitalism is not some natural, inevitable state of human evolution. It is actually a historical anomaly.
Wait, really? An anomaly?
Yeah, he argued it's a very recent system that forcefully separated the quote-unquote economy from the rest of society.
Right, because prior to the Industrial Revolution, you didn't just have this distinct sphere of life called the economy where you went to maximize profit.
No, not at all. It wasn't divorced from your religion or your family. The economy was, to use his term, embedded.
Embedded. I love that term. Meaning economic behavior was just totally submerged in your social relationships.
Exactly. You didn't trade just to get rich. You traded to maintain your social standing or to fulfill your duties to your kin or even just to appease the gods.
So Polanyi basically mapped out human history into three different ways that societies organize things, right?
Yes, three mechanisms of economic integration. The first one he called reciprocity.
Okay, break that down for us.
It's a system based on mutual obligation, usually tied to your clan identity,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like a barter system.
Right. It's not like I give you a chicken today, you owe me a chicken tomorrow.
Exactly. It is a continuous, lifelong flow of resources based simply on who you are in the social web.
And the text has this amazing anthropological example of reciprocity, the Kula ring of the Trobriand Islanders.
Oh, the early European observers were completely baffled by the Kula ring.
Because you had these islanders taking these massive, super dangerous ocean voyages in little canoes, traveling hundreds of miles to neighboring islands.
And what were they trading? Shell armbands and necklaces?
Just shells. And they didn't even keep them. A tribal leader would get a necklace, hold it for a few months to look cool and get some prestige, and then put it right back on a canoe to give it to someone else on the next island.
Right. So to a classical Western economist, risking your life to trade useless shells that you immediately give away is just pure irrationality.
It makes zero mathematical sense.
But through Polanyi's lens of reciprocity, it makes perfect sense. The exchange itself is the value. It creates this massive web of political alliances.
Okay, so that's reciprocity. What was the second mechanism?
Redistribution. This one requires a central, hierarchical authority. So think of the ancient Egyptians or the Incas or the Aztecs.
Big agricultural empires.
Right. The central authority, like a temple or a king, demands tribute or taxes from everyone on the edges. All the goods flow into the center.
And then the king redistributes them back out.
Exactly. Through massive feasts or public works or emergency rations during a famine. The motive isn't individual profit, it's maintaining the state and the hierarchy.
Which brings us to the third form, which is exchange, which is basically what we do today.
Yes, exchange is the calculated, transactional buying and selling in a market. Supply, demand, prices.
Now, Polanyi admitted that exchange has existed throughout history, right?
He did, but he argued that before the modern era, exchange was always kept tightly contained. It was restricted to very specific marketplaces or specific merchant classes.
And this is what made his book, The Great Transformation, so radical. He said that modern capitalism took this third mechanism, exchange, and just let it devour the other two.
Exactly. It disembedded the economy. It turned land, labor, and money into pure commodities. And he argued that was inherently destructive for human society.
So the substantivists take this framework and they basically draw a line in the sand.
A hard line. They said, look, because non-Western societies were driven by reciprocity and redistribution, you fundamentally cannot use modern Western microeconomic tools to study them.
Right, you can't calculate the supply and demand of Kula ring necklaces.
It's analytically useless. It's like trying to use a flint knife to fix a jet engine, or applying the rules of chess to a poker game.
It's totally the wrong tool.
The players are operating under completely different wind conditions.
But obviously, the classical economists and the formalist anthropologists, they were not going to take that lying down.
No, they launched a massive counterattack. The formalist argument relies on this very specific definition of economics proposed by Lionel Robbins in the 1930s.
And what was his definition?
Robbins said economics isn't about money or factories. It is simply the science of human behavior as a relationship between ends and scarce means which have alternative uses.
Wow, okay. That is broad.
It is the ultimate universal skeleton key. The formalist looked at the substantivist and said, you guys are completely misunderstanding what microeconomics actually is.
Because you don't actually need money to maximize something.
Exactly. You don't need a stock exchange or capitalism. Every human being, everywhere, wakes up and faces a world of scarcity, limited time, limited energy.
And we always have to choose how to allocate those scarce things toward our goals.
Right. So the formalists argued that the Trobriand islander on that canoe is acting like a rational, maximizing capitalist.
He's just maximizing social prestige instead of dollars.
Yes. You can use the exact same mathematical curves used to predict wheat prices in Chicago and apply them to indigenous tribes. You just swap out dollars for social capital.
Okay, but this is where I really have to push back, because this formalist idea of expanding utility to mean literally everything, it feels like a massive intellectual trap.
Oh, it absolutely is.
Let me give you a real-world example. Say it's Saturday. I have the option to pick up an overtime shift and make $300, but instead I choose to spend 8 hours breaking my back helping a friend move a terrible heavy sofa up 3 flights of stairs. For free.
A true friend.
Right. Now, a formalist looks at that and says, You weighed the $300 against your friendship, and you calculated that your friendship utility was worth at least $301. So you rationally maximize your social capital.
I absolutely would say that.
But doesn't that just strip the actual humanity out of the choice? It reduces this beautiful, agonizing moral impulse to a cynical math equation.
It does.
It feels like looking at a beautiful painting and just calling it a highly efficient distribution of paint. You described it, but you missed the whole point.
That is the exact trap. And it's what the substantivists hammered them on. If every single action a human takes is, by definition, the maximization of some invisible utility, then the theory becomes a tautology.
It's totally circular.
Exactly. Why did he help his friend move? Because it maximized his utility. How do we know it maximized his utility? Because he chose to help his friend move.
Right, a scientific theory that explains literally everything actually explains nothing at all.
If an equation can mathematically accommodate Mother Teresa and a Wall Street hedge fund manager using the exact same variables, it has lost all its descriptive power.
Okay, but to be fair, we shouldn't totally dismiss the formalists, right?
No, we shouldn't.
Yeah.
Because they forced a really vital correction in anthropology. Before them, there was this tendency to view indigenous people or peasants as these romanticized static figures.
Like they were just blindly following ancient traditions without thinking.
Right. But the formalists proved empirically that people living in extreme poverty are actually incredibly shrewd, calculating decision makers. They have to be.
Yeah, when you're living on the edge of starvation, you are constantly running intense risk-benefit analyses on crops and labor.
Exactly. So both sides had valid points.
So after throwing haymakers at each other for a decade, who actually won this academic brawl?
Ultimately, nobody. By the mid-1970s, the debate just completely fizzled out.
They just got tired.
They realized they had dug themselves into rigid ideological trenches and were arguing completely past each other.
Let me guess. The formalists were looking at individuals from the bottom up, and the substantivists were looking at society from the top down.
Nailed it. The formalists were obsessed with individual choices, and the substantivists were obsessed with institutions imposing rules. They both failed because they started with massive, unproven assumptions about human nature.
So it was just a philosophical deadlock.
Pretty much. And to see how the discipline actually moved past this staring contest, we have to look at how anthropologists started applying these ideas to the messy, rapidly changing real world of the 1970s.
Which brings us to section 2, Beyond the Brawl. And I am so excited about this part because the text introduces one of the most powerful critiques of neoclassical economics, feminism and the household economy.
This critique is devastating. It strikes at the very foundation of how we even define what an economy is.
Because historically, classical economics was basically established by wealthy Western men, right?
Exactly. And it was built on this strict cultural dualism. During the Industrial Revolution, work moved out of the home and into the factory.
And that created a huge conceptual split.
Right. You had the public sphere, which was the market, rationality, competition, and men. And then you had the private sphere, which was the household, emotion, nurturing, and women.
And economics just defined itself strictly as the science of the public market. It drew a circle around the house and said, everything in here is invisible to us.
It's not economics. That's literally what they said.
And the text highlights how catastrophic this blind spot is by looking at the gross national product, the GNP.
Let's break down the actual mechanism of that flaw, because it's wild.
It is wild. Listen to this. If you are a parent and you stay home to raise your own kids, cook meals, clean the house, take care of sick relatives, you are producing massive societal value.
You are literally reproducing and maintaining the labor force.
Exactly. But because no wages are paid, the GNP registers your contribution to the economy as exactly $0.
Right. But if you enter the formal market, get a job as a nanny, and pay your nephew to clean your house, suddenly that exact same labor is monetized, and the GNP skyrockets.
It makes no sense. It artificially devalues domestic work. It treats the household as just a passive consuming unit.
Now, economists like Gary Becker did try to fix this later with something called the new home economics. He tried to apply formalist math to family decisions.
But the feminists totally dismantled that too, didn't they?
They did, because Becker assumed the household was this unified, altruistic entity led by a benevolent head of the family.
Which totally ignores the fact that a household is basically a political arena.
Exactly. It's filled with power dynamics, inequality, and fierce negotiations over resources.
And the text backs this up with amazing real-world examples. like the factory daughters in Java.
Oh, the Java study is fascinating.
Right. So when multinational corporations set up manufacturing plants in Indonesia, they didn't just plug into some pristine, rational labor market.
No, the factory floor was completely dictated by the patriarchal hierarchies of the Javanese villages.
The daughters' wages weren't individual profit for them to spend. They were heavily sent back to the rural household based on complex family obligations.
The global supply chain was literally being subsidized by local domestic power structures.
And we see the exact same thing in the knitting industries in Turkey.
Yes, in Turkey you have these sprawling, decentralized networks where garments are produced inside people's homes.
So the labor relations are basically indistinguishable from family relations.
Exactly. An aunt might be managing her nieces on the production line. A dispute over knitting quotas is simultaneously a family argument at the dinner table.
So if you tried to analyze that knitting industry using standard corporate microeconomics,
You would fail completely. If you ignore the marriage networks and the gendered expectations, you miss the entire engine driving the production. The boundary between the rational public market and the emotional private home is a total fiction.
wow. So that realization that economic behavior is totally tangled up with our physical and social environment leads into another major shift in the text: ecological anthropology.
Right. Ecological models tried to look at humans as biological creatures, balancing the maximization of genetic fitness with personal utility.
But those models ran into a massive wall when they tried to explain the largest demographic on Earth during the 20th century:
The peasant farmers.
the peasant farmer.
Yeah.
If peasants were simply trying to maximize financial profit, their farming habits would look entirely different. And this was a huge puzzle for global policymakers.
For decades, places like the World Bank would look at peasant farmers and just throw their hands up. They couldn't understand why these people stubbornly refused to act like Wall Street traders.
They called them backward or irrational or superstitious just because they wouldn't adopt high-yield seeds or capitalist farming tech.
But they were looking through the wrong lens entirely. It took a Russian agricultural economist named A.V. Chainov to crack the puzzle.
And Chainov's logic is absolutely brilliant. He proved peasants aren't irrational at all.
No, they operate on a distinct, highly sophisticated logic. Chainov looked at the life cycle of the family.
Because a capitalist farm and a peasant farm have totally different win conditions.
Exactly. A capitalist enterprise exists to accumulate infinite profit. A peasant household exists to secure its own survival and reproduce itself.
So Chainov came up with this mechanism based on the consumer-to-worker ratio within a single family.
Let's walk through that because it's so elegant. When a young peasant couple has several small children, those children are consumers.
Right, they need calories to survive, but they aren't workers yet. They can't plow a field.
So the consumer-to-worker ratio is terrible. The parents have to endure extreme physical drudgery, working themselves to the bone just to meet the baseline caloric needs.
But as those kids grow into teenagers and actually start working in the fields, the ratio flips.
You have more hands contributing to the harvest.
And this is where the capitalist model totally fails to predict what happens next. A capitalist assumes that with all this new free labor, the family is going to double their output, create a massive surplus, sell it, and build a farming empire.
But Chayanov showed that peasants actually balance the physical agony of labor against their limited needs.
Once their basic needs are met, the utility of an extra sack of grain just isn't worth the backbreaking labor required to grow it.
So when the kids get older and can work, the parents actually work less.
They literally decrease their labor intensity so they can enjoy some leisure time or go to religious festivals. They value time over infinite accumulation.
Which is perfectly rational within their constraints. But as the 20th century progressed and global capitalism started aggressively pushing into the developing world, a massive debate erupted over these peasant communities.
Oh, the Scott versus Popkin debate. This basically maps the old substantivist formalist fight onto the violent realities of the Cold War.
It absolutely does. Let's start with James Scott. His theory of the moral economy deeply resonates with Polanyi's ideas.
Scott looked at peasant villages in Southeast Asia and basically said they operate on a moral safety net.
Because peasants live so close to the margins of survival, one bad drought means starvation, so they are inherently risk-averse.
They don't want to gamble on some new, unproven cash crop.
Right. And they survive through village reciprocity. The wealthy landlords are morally obligated to offer loans during famines, and neighbors share labor.
So Scott argued that when colonial powers or capitalist markets invaded these spaces, forcing them to pay taxes in cash or switch to wage labor, it destroyed that moral safety net.
And that, Scott argued, is why peasants rebelled. They weren't fighting for better wages, they were fighting to protect their moral right to subsistence. They were morally outraged.
And then you have Samuel Popkin, who looked at the exact same villages and drew the exact opposite conclusion.
Popkin's rational peasant theory is basically formalism armed with historical data. He argued that Scott's vision of the harmonious, cooperative village was a complete myth.
Popkin essentially said the moral village is a cage.
Exactly. He claimed those tight-knit structures were often engineered by oppressive colonial states just to make it easier to collect taxes and draft labor.
So he viewed peasants as highly rational, self-interested actors who were just held back by terrible local institutions and corrupt elites.
He argued many peasants actually welcomed market capitalism because it offered them a way out of the stifling hierarchy. They wanted to innovate and maximize wealth. They just needed a fair chance.
Okay, I have to play devil's advocate here because Popkin theory really struggles to explain the sheer intensity of historical peasant uprisings.
It does.
I mean, if Popkin is right and peasants are just frustrated entrepreneurs waiting for a free market, why do we see centuries of peasants violently resisting the privatization of land?
A great question.
Why do they burn down plantations and assassinate tax collectors when free market reforms are introduced? Scott's theory of moral outrage explains a violent rebellion way better than Popkin's idea of thwarted capitalism. People generally don't risk execution just because they want a slightly more efficient supply chain.
That is a highly sophisticated critique, and it cuts to the core of why this debate is so vital. Scott captures the collective, defensive reaction against cultural destruction, while Popkin correctly identifies that local village structures were often deeply unequal.
And it is critical to note here, and we want to be completely impartial on the global politics of this, that this debate wasn't just academic. It had profound life-or-death consequences in the real world.
Absolutely. The source text examines how these theories intersected with structural adjustment policies pushed by the World Bank and the IMF in the 1980s and 90s.
Right. The logic of those structural adjustment programs was heavily aligned with neoclassical rational actor economics.
They looked at developing nations struggling with debt and prescribed a bitter medicine.
They said you have to cut government food subsidies, privatize state industries, and shift your farming from growing food to eat to growing cash crops like coffee or cotton for export.
Because the mathematical model predicted this would increase efficiency, generate foreign currency, and pay down the debt.
But the empirical anthropological data reported in the text paints a very different picture of the outcome.
By ignoring the embedded social reality of these economies, by assuming everyone was just an isolated rational actor, these policies often triggered catastrophic social turmoil.
Because cutting food subsidies to balance a spreadsheet in Washington led directly to widespread malnutrition in local villages.
And transitioning to cash crops exposed vulnerable farmers to the vicious volatility of global commodity markets.
So the text uses these outcomes to raise serious questions about the limits of neoclassical economics when it's deployed as a blunt instrument.
Exactly.
Which means if this whole peasant debate rests on whether humans are driven by traditional morals or selfish rationality, we really need to dive deep into the very foundation of Western economic thought.
We have to look at what you call the cult of the self.
Yes. Section 3, the cult of the self, neoclassical microeconomics. This is the absolute dominant paradigm of our age.
And to understand the machinery of how economists map our desires today, we have to go back to the 18th century, to Adam Smith.
Adam Smith, the guy who basically created the modern world.
He was writing in a period where the intellectual world was undergoing a massive shift. Before the Enlightenment, economic philosophy was completely bound up with Catholic theology.
Right. If a merchant charged crazy high interest, it wasn't a market inefficiency. It was the sin of usury.
Value was dictated by divine order. But Smith and his contemporaries wanted to create a true objective science of the economy. They needed to strip God and morality out of the equation.
They wanted a natural law for human interaction, like gravity.
So Smith decided that the fundamental source of all value is human labor. And the text provides this classic foundational example.
The beaver and the deer.
Yes. Imagine early Native Americans in a hypothetical state of nature. If it consistently takes a hunter twice as much time and effort to track, kill, and process a beaver as it takes to hunt a deer.
Then the natural market value of one beaver is equal to 2 deer.
Exactly. The value isn't arbitrary. It is physically anchored to the time and toil required to produce it.
But Smith went further, right? He proposed a psychological bedrock for this whole system.
He wrote that humans possess an innate biological propensity to truck, barter, and exchange. He posited that humans are naturally, inherently self-interested.
But here is Smith's absolute genius. He argued that this selfishness is not a sin that society needs to suppress.
Through the mechanism of the invisible hand, the pursuit of individual self-interest actually creates social harmony.
It's so counterintuitive, but so elegant. If you want to get rich, you have to offer a better product at a lower price than your competitor. So your selfish greed accidentally forces you to serve the needs of the community.
Greed is mathematically transmuted into the common good.
It's an incredibly seductive idea, and the descendants of Adam Smith took that basic concept of the rational, self-interested individual and built a towering mathematical cathedral around it.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because microeconomics eventually abandons the idea that value comes purely from labor.
Right, they decided value is entirely subjective. Every person is just trying to maximize their utility, their personal satisfaction.
And economists literally map out the geography of human desire using these things called indifference curves.
Let's break down the mechanics of an indifference curve using the specific example from the text. T-shirts and pairs of shorts.
Okay, picture a graph. The vertical axis is the number of T-shirts you own. The horizontal axis is shorts.
Got it. Now imagine you currently have 5 T-shirts, but only 1 pair of shorts.
Your wardrobe is completely unbalanced. You are desperate for shorts.
In this state, you might be willing to trade 3 of your T-shirts just to get 1 more pair of shorts.
But the crucial mechanism here is the diminishing rate of marginal substitution.
As you slide down the curve, your situation changes. Let's say you now have 5 pairs of shorts. You don't need a 6th pair nearly as badly as you needed the 2nd pair.
The utility of that next pair has diminished. So to get a 6th pair of shorts, you might only be willing to give up half a T-shirt.
And when you plot these points of equal satisfaction, where you are quote-unquote indifferent between the combination of shirts and shorts, it creates this convex curve.
Economists use webs of these curves to mathematically predict exactly what consumers will do when a price fluctuates by a single cent.
And this mathematical modeling extends to how whole populations react to price changes through the concept of elasticity.
Elasticity measures the precise sensitivity of demand. The text uses a superb contrast from West Africa for this.
The sorghum example.
Right. Sorghum is a fundamental dietary staple grain in the region. The demand for sorghum is highly inelastic.
Because the biological imperative overrides any financial calculation. People must eat sorghum to survive.
If the price drops to a penny, they don't buy 10,000 pounds of it because they could only eat so much.
And more importantly, if a drought causes the price to skyrocket, people won't stop buying it. They will sell their tools, go into debt, sacrifice everything else, but they will still buy roughly the same amount of sorghum.
The demand curve is completely rigid.
But contrast that with ornamented metal bowls in the exact same society.
Those are luxury items for status and display. The demand for those bowls is highly elastic.
Because nobody needs a decorative bowl to survive, so their purchasing decisions are hypersensitive to price.
If a new trade route opens and the price drops, people flood the market and buy dozens of them. If the price spikes, the market evaporates instantly.
By charting elasticity, economists can project massive global supply chain flows. It's a hugely powerful tool.
And they apply similar rational mechanisms to the supply side, too, trying to deduce the universal laws of production. This brings us to economies of scale.
I love how the text subverts this using the Kekchimaya roof thatchers. It grounds the abstract math in physical reality.
Exactly. Neoclassical economics wants to find the mathematical optimum for labor organization. So look at the physical mechanics of building a house in a Kekchimaya village.
If you are trying to thatch a roof with palm leaves, one person literally cannot do it alone. Gravity and the vines require cooperation.
You need someone holding the heavy vines tight while another person knots them. The absolute minimum viable production unit is 4 people.
You have 3 workers up balancing on the rafters and 1 worker on the ground handing materials up.
Now, as you add more workers to this group, output per person doesn't just stay flat, it accelerates.
This is the mechanism of increasing marginal returns.
With 8 people, the ground crew can prepare materials faster than the rafters can use them, so they rotate. The synergy makes the group highly efficient.
And the mathematical peak of efficiency, the optimum economy of scale, is reached at a group size of 12.
But the math dictates that you cannot scale this infinitely. You hit a wall.
If you expand the group to 25 people, the efficiency plateaus. The return on adding a new worker diminishes.
And if you force the group up to 35 people, the entire system collapses into negative marginal returns.
Because the physical space of the roof cannot accommodate that many bodies, you have 35 people standing around bumping shoulders, stepping on leaves, shouting conflicting instructions.
The sheer administrative overhead of coordinating them means the overall output is actually lower than if you only had 12 people.
It is a perfect physical demonstration of the limits of scale.
So when you look at all this, the indifference curves, the elasticity, the marginal returns, neoclassical economics paints a breathtakingly coherent picture of human beings.
We appear to be perfectly rational, calculating machines, constantly running internal algorithms to optimize our utility.
It's a beautiful theory. The math is pristine. There's only one tiny fatal flaw.
Human beings are not machines.
No, we are not. And the empirical critiques of the rational maximizer are devastating.
Psychologists have spent decades proving our brains simply do not run the algorithms Adam Smith thought they did.
Take the cognitive psychologist Amos Tversky. He ran these profound experiments involving simple coin tosses.
Because a coin toss is objectively a 50-50 probability, every single flip is independent.
But Tversky showed that human brains fundamentally cannot process basic statistical probability. If a human watches a coin land on heads 5 times in a row, they will almost universally bet that the next flip must be tails.
Because they feel tails is due. Our cognitive wiring makes us inherently, predictably irrational in our calculations of risk and reward.
Then you have Herbert Simon, a titan in economics, who shattered the idea of perfect optimization with his concept of satisficing.
Neoclassical theory assumes you have perfect information and unlimited brain power to find the absolute maximum utility for every choice.
Simon pointed out how absurd this is. Imagine walking into a massive supermarket to buy toothpaste. To truly act as a rational maximizer, you would have to mathematically weigh the price, volume, fluoride concentration, whitening capability, and flavor profile of all 60 options against each other.
It would take you 3 hours just to buy toothpaste, which nobody does.
Exactly. Simon proved that instead of optimizing, we satisfice. We set a baseline threshold. We want mint flavor, and it has to be under $4.
And we scan the shelf until we find the very first option that meets that threshold. It's good enough.
We make the purchase and move on. We do not maximize, we settle. Our rationality is severely bounded by time and energy.
But the ultimate fatal blow to the purely selfish actor brings us right back to the hook of our show, the ultimatum game.
This isn't just a quirky psychological trick. It is a robust, cross-cultural sledgehammer to neoclassical microeconomics.
Let's dissect exactly why this game breaks the models. Remember the rules. Player 1 gets 10 real dollars and has to offer a split to player 2.
If player 2 accepts, both keep the cash. If player 2 rejects it, the researchers take all the money back. Both get 0.
Now, the neoclassical model makes a rigid, falsifiable prediction here. It dictates that player 1, being selfish, will offer the absolute minimum, $9.99 for them, 1 cent for player 2.
And it dictates that player 2, being equally selfish, will gladly accept the 1 cent, because 1 cent is mathematically greater than 0 cents.
But as we said at the start, when anthropologists took this game across 15 drastically different global societies, the prediction failed spectacularly everywhere.
Player 2s almost universally reject highly unequal offers. If offered a 90-10 split, they will choose to destroy the free money.
The mechanism here is spite or moral outrage. The psychological pain of being disrespected is far more intense than the utility of gaining $1.
They will pay out of their own pocket, essentially, to punish the greed of player 1.
And what's fascinating here is the behavior of player 1. Knowing they're dealing with a human being and not a math equation, player 1 almost never offers the terrible split.
Across cultures, the average offer is between 25 and 50% of the total amount.
And we know it isn't just pure altruism because researchers run a control variant called the dictator game, where player 2 isn't allowed to reject the offer.
Right. When the threat of punishment is removed, player 1 gets greedier, but still rarely takes the full 100%.
The causal implication here is massive. The ultimatum game empirically proves that human culture, our ingrained sense of fairness, completely overrides pure, selfish economic calculation.
You cannot model an economy on the assumption that humans are isolated utility maximizers, because we are constantly monitoring our social standing and enforcing moral boundaries.
Which forces a massive pivot in our entire analytical framework. If the isolated individual is a myth, we have to look at theories that place the group above the individual.
We have to shift into Section 4, the power of the pack, social and political economy.
And our first heavy hitter here is the foundational sociologist Emil Durkheim.
Durkheim provides a view of human nature that is the exact mirror opposite of Adam Smith. Smith thought individuals were naturally peaceful and inclined to trade. Durkheim looked at human nature and saw chaos.
He believed that humans in their natural state are driven by unlimited, insatiable, and fundamentally destructive desires.
We are a vortex of selfish appetites. If left to our own devices, we would tear each other apart.
Therefore, for Durkheim, society is not just a convenient marketplace. Society is a massive external organism that pre-exists us and survives after we die.
Society creates the individual, not the other way around. And because human desires are so destructive, society has to engineer mechanisms to force us to cooperate. It uses a carrot and a stick.
The stick is obvious. It's the legal system, prisons, and the intense social shame that crashes down on anyone who breaks the rules.
But the carrot is far more profound. Society binds us together by creating a collective unconscious, a shared system of sacred rituals and symbols that give us a transcendent sense of unity.
We participate in these rituals, like a religious ceremony or a massive sporting event, and we experience what Durkheim called collective effervescence.
We feel the literal, intoxicating power of the group surging through us.
And this framework completely obliterates the classical definitions of value. Smith said value comes from labor. Microeconomics says value comes from subjective utility. Durkheim says value is entirely a social construction.
The text's example of the national flag is the perfect distillation of this.
Look at a flag purely objectively. It is a physically worthless, cheap piece of dyed cloth. It has zero intrinsic utility. You can't eat it.
Yet, an otherwise rational human being will pick up a rifle, charge headfirst into machine gun fire, and gladly die to prevent that cheap piece of cloth from touching the ground.
Why? Because the flag is a collective representation. It is the physical manifestation of the society itself.
When the soldier dies for the flag, they are submitting to the supreme moral authority of the group. The social construction of value completely overrides the instinct for self-preservation. Value isn't calculated, it is worshipped.
Okay, but I have to interject here, because Durkheim's vision feels incredibly claustrophobic.
How so?
He basically argues that society acts like a giant authoritarian cookie cutter shaping all of our minds. If society is this omnipotent, static organism, how do we explain massive cultural shifts? Look at the 1960s counterculture movement.
Right, a massive rejection of the rules.
Millions of individuals simultaneously looked at the sacred rules of the establishment and utterly rejected them. Doesn't Durkheim's model make us seem like mindless ants, incapable of agency?
You've zeroed in on the exact vulnerability in his architecture. To account for how societies evolve without shattering, Durkheim developed a theory of social evolution based on population density.
Mechanical versus organic solidarity.
Yes, he argued that early pre-industrial clans were held together by mechanical solidarity. Everyone does essentially the same work, shares the same daily rhythms. They are cohesive because they are identical.
But as populations explode and cities form,
the dynamic density changes. When you pack millions of people together, they can't all be subsistence farmers. They'd starve. So society undergoes an evolutionary adaptation, the division of labor.
People specialize. You become a blacksmith, I become a baker.
This creates organic solidarity. We become like the differentiated organs in a single biological body. The stomach and the heart look totally different, but the heart dies without the stomach.
Because we no longer share the exact same beliefs, the old religious bonds weaken. Society has to invent secular laws and contracts to coordinate these interdependent organs and keep the body alive.
So for Durkheim, society evolves dynamically to suppress conflict and maintain harmony.
It is a sweeping, peaceful view of evolution. Everything works together for the survival of the whole. But that functionalism leads us directly into the path of Karl Marx.
Because Marx looked at the exact same industrialized cities that Durkheim looked at, and instead of seeing harmonious organs, Marx saw a brutal, blood-soaked battlefield.
We're shifting into political economy and class struggle.
To understand Marx's economic architecture, you must understand his premise about human essence. He didn't think we were naturally greedy or chaotic beasts.
Marx believed humans are fundamentally creative beings who discover our humanity through labor.
We consciously imagine a project, like a carved chair, and then cooperatively transform nature to build it. When we control our tools, we pour our essence into the object.
But Marx argued that modern industrial capitalism systematically alienated us from that fundamental human essence.
And the mechanism of how that alienation happens is the core of Marxist economic theory. It's the concept of surplus value.
Let's break down the mechanics of surplus value because it explains his entire view of history. Imagine a skilled shoemaker before the Industrial Revolution.
They own their leather, they own their awl, and they control their time. They sell shoes for $100 and keep the full value of their creative labor.
But under industrial capitalism, the worker is stripped of their tools. The factory owner, the capitalist, owns the machines and the building. The worker only owns their physical time, which they must sell for a wage.
So the worker goes into the factory. In the first 4 hours, they produce enough shoes to generate $20 of value.
Let's say $20 is exactly what the worker needs to buy food and survive for the day. If the system were perfectly equal, the worker would go home at lunch.
But they don't go home. The capitalist owns their time for another 4 hours.
And in that second half of the shift, the worker produces another $80 worth of shoes. But they don't get that money.
The capitalist keeps it as profit. That $80 discrepancy is the surplus value. Marx's central thesis is that profit is not a reward for innovation. Profit is literally the unpaid labor of the working class.
He argued that throughout all of history, the central story of society is how powerful classes use private property to systematically extract the surplus value from the workers.
It is a lens of structural exploitation.
And I want to explicitly remind the listener here that we are presenting Marxist theories purely as foundational analytical frameworks for understanding political economy, as laid out in the source text, without endorsing the ideology.
Right, it's a diagnostic tool. While Durkheim told anthropologists to look for rituals that create harmony, Marx told them to look at who owns the land and where the surplus crop is going.
If we connect this back to the bigger picture, Durkheim and Marx are total opposites in their diagnosis, but they both completely depart from classical economics.
Both absolutely agree that you cannot understand economics by looking at an isolated individual. The group is the primary engine of human behavior.
So what does this all mean? We have traveled from Pacific Islands to the factories of Java through the minds of Adam Smith, Durkheim, and Marx. We have mapped out 3 entirely different models of human nature.
3 different X-rays of the soul. First, the self-interested human, maximizing utility with shorts and T-shirts in a world of scarcity.
Second, the social human, acting as a functional organ in Durkheim's society or fighting in Marx's class struggle.
And third, the moral human, guided by a cultural cosmology, furiously rejecting unfair offers in the ultimatum game.
So, to you, the listener, the next time you buy a coffee, ask yourself, are you buying it because it maximizes your caloric utility?
Or because the Green Mermaid logo is a social ritual required for organic solidarity at your workplace?
Or because the fair trade label aligns with your cultural moral cosmos? The truth is, humans exist in the messy gray area. We balance all 3.
Which is why relying on only one of these models is a profound analytical failure.
Which leaves me with a final provocative thought for you to ponder. If our global economic models, which dictate international policies and interest rates, are built strictly on the idea of the rational, self-interested individual.
But humans are actually deeply social and moral creatures.
Are we currently designing a global economy for a species that doesn't actually exist?
That is the vital question. If the machine is calibrated for a phantom, we shouldn't be surprised when the gears grind up the people caught inside it.
Something to ponder the next time you're checking your retirement account, arguing about politics, or just buying that cup of coffee. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep questioning the unquestionable assumptions around you, and keep diving deep into the hidden cultural forces that shape your world.